Hello, and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Joyce Dooley. I'm the Senior Research and Content Analyst here at Zpryme Research. Today's an incredibly exciting day because we're going to be talking about equity, economics, and the role of energy connectors. And I'm joined today with Gil and Jan, and we're going to be digging into some really interesting topics. But before we kind of get started, I'd really love for them to introduce themselves. Gil, would you like to kick us off?
Yes, Joyce, thank you for having us. And it's an honor to be with my friend here, Jan. My name is Gil Quiniones. I'm the President and Chief Executive Officer of the New York Power Authority. The New York Power Authority, or as we call NYPA, is the largest state-owned electric utility in the United States. We produce about 25% of all electricity in New York, 80% of that from hydro, and we own about a third of the high voltage transmission grid here. Good to be with you.
Oh, it's fantastic to have you. And Jan, thank you so much for joining us today as well.
Thanks, Joyce. Yes, Jan Vrins. I lead our energy, sustainability, and infrastructure segment at Guidehouse. Some of you will know Guidehouse. Some of you will still know us as Navigant, previously Navigant. But we actually joined forces with Guidehouse, which was PwC's public sector consulting business. So now we serve both the public sector as well as the commercial sectors like financial services and healthcare, and of course, and energy, which we're going to talk about a lot. So excited to be here with Gil, and let's make it really interesting for all the people on the call.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. And thank you. It doesn't seem like you guys have enough to do. So I'm really glad we could set this up and give you a chance to get some work in. While we're still waiting for people to kind of populate the call, I think everybody has kind of gotten into some interesting things over the last year and some change with COVID-19 and, picking up any pandemic hobbies. Gil, have you been working on anything?
Yeah, being home a lot, I was able to pick up my guitar once again. I used to play a lot of guitar growing up. It's been in hiatus for a while, so I was happy to be able to retune and tune up my guitar and restrung them and been playing a little bit. And then I just found out my daughter, Sella, who's about almost 15 now, 15 next month, expressed interest to learn, and it was a surprise. And so I'm gonna get her a guitar and we're gonna jam together.
That's amazing. No, it sounds like a lot of fun. Are you an acoustic guitar player, or are
it's an acoustic electric. So
right.
you can plug it if you want, but you can play it without an amp if you want to.
It's a hybrid.
Yeah.
Yes, it's a hybrid.
I have a feeling we're going to be talking about a lot of hybrid things here moving forward in the conversation. But Jan, I believe that you're super involved in a really great charity event that has been a little bit more prominent, or at least is a little bit more active within the last year. Would you tell us a little bit more about Covenant House and your work with them?
Yeah, sure. I'm on the board of Covenant House Florida. Covenant House is a shelter for homeless youth, and they do more than shelter. They also do a lot of career development and training. They do GED program, and they have a lot of healthcare services as well for homeless youth between the age of 15 and 21. There's a lot for young children. There's a lot for adults, but that middle group is often forgotten. And yeah, it's been tough for them. With the COVID, obviously they had to change a lot of the processes and the procedures. And they obviously had more kids sleeping out as well on the streets. So it was exciting that we still could do our biggest fundraising event every year, which is the Executive Sleep Out, where we have executives sleeping out across North America, different cities. I'm lucky because I'm in Miami, so it's kind of warm. We have people sleeping out in New York, where Gil is, where it was extremely cold in the November timeframe. And we raised a lot of money this year. The only difference this year was we couldn't really sleep out where we normally sleep out at the shelter or our parking lot or a park. Everybody was sleeping out at their own house virtually. So I was sleeping outside here on our basketball court. My son plays basketball, and it was still cool that we connected virtually and could raise all that money for homeless youth. So it was really cool to do through COVID times, Joyce.
Yeah, no, I mean, thank you again for calling attention to that. It's an incredibly important thing that we all need to kind of keep in mind and to remember how fortunate most of us are here in the US and how we can continue to support. And Gil, I know that you are also active in your community throughout the last couple of years. What is it that you are working on in terms of the
Well,
charity?
yeah, we have a local food bank slash soup kitchen close by here, Holy Apostles, and they do a great job. They serve over 1,000 meals every day uh, to people who are food insecure here in New York. And my family and I, we volunteer there a lot, and it's really very rewarding.
Oh my gosh. Well, thank you guys so much. We really appreciate the contributions that you're bringing to us today, as well as to your communities and the impact on the industry overall. So before we kind of dig into the topic a little bit more, for those of you who are tuning in on zpryme.com, thank you so much for joining us. We will be taking questions throughout. So if you want to drop your comments down below, we'll be happy to try to answer them as we move forward. There's no reason for us to wait till the very end to try to get your questions answered. And with that, like, let's kind of set up the scene, right? So we're talking about, we're talking about equity and economic development and the role of energy connectors. It's no secret that utilities are transforming as a result of climate change and technological advancements, as well as the increase in customer demand and expectations that are coming. And so, there's kind of a shifting role that they're kind of taking from a simple provider perspective into this regional energy connector role or concept. And it's supposed to really set up the next era of energy innovation. So, kind of with that, I would love to get your perspectives on a couple of things. So, starting off, um, Jan, what does it mean to be an energy connector, and what level of impact do they have?
Yeah, sure. And it's very interesting, Joyce. About 6, 7 years ago, the industry was talking about the debt spiral, where utilities would stop to exist because people would generate their own electricity and for their usage, and they would have peer-to-peer transactions, and the utilities would become obsolete. Less and less electricity would be provided on the traditional, generation, transmission, distribution assets, and so on and so forth. Around that same time, we actually said, as at that time as Navigant, we said the actual opposite will happen. Energy providers, utilities, will become more important. We wrote this piece, which we called the Energy Cloud, and it was a vision of the future of the energy system. And we know utilities traditionally as asset owners and operators, and they've evolved to service providers on top of that as well. But the next iteration will really be where they become connectors or orchestrators of a very complex energy system, where you still have central station generation, transmission, very important, distribution. You have distribution and resources, including electric vehicles, which we will talk about here in a minute. And the utility really has a role to, as a spider in the web, make it all work from a cost perspective, from a reliability perspective, from a safety perspective, and then, more important lately, from a sustainability perspective, so make it more green, decarbonize our energy system as well. So we definitely see a bigger role for utilities going forward. And by the way, the value of the utility will increase as well because of that role that they fulfill. We need to make sure that we don't duplicate a resource. We need to make sure that we use all the resources at the right time. Customers have significantly increased their demands with what type of service they want. They also have broadened their demands. It's not just about commodity electricity or gas anymore. They want much more from their energy provider. They want energy efficiency. They want the energy provider to help them with decarbonizing their buildings, with decarbonizing their fleets, so on and so forth. So I think these are really exciting times for utilities. And yeah, hopefully in the next couple of years, we actually will not call them utilities anymore, but we will call them connectors, energy connectors, or energy orchestrators, because that is really, I think, the name that describes best how the role of the utilities will change going forward.
No, I mean, I can completely agree with you on that. I think that, especially within the last year and some change, we've really seen the push for utilities to kind of step up and take more of a thought leadership role. I know that models are going to be changing across the board. Partner ecosystems will also be developing and get more robust, especially when we're looking at, a recovery period and the preparations for some of the innovations that are coming. Speaking of some of those models, Gil, I'd really love to hear from you. How does the digitization of services and the application of emerging technologies really change those traditional models in energy? And what interests you the most right now?
Yeah. Well, I agree with Jan that utilities really, we are the platform, right? So we provide the physical platform, and on top of that, over time, we will be the orchestrator of all the players in this ecosystem. What's important is that computing power, both software and hardware, not just in the energy industry, but in general, has have really significantly improved and are improving. And then improvements in material science and power electronics are two of the other things that's really enabling this digitization of the power system. At NYPA, we've started this journey since 2013, 2014, when we declared we want to aspire to be the first digital utility. One of the areas that's very interesting to us right now is in the area of asset management. We are streaming about 50,000 sensor points right now. By the end of this year, about 150,000 sensor points, where we assess the health of our assets, power plant, substation, transmission system, real time, all the time. And we're able to predict failures and avoid unplanned outages. We're smarter in where we put our capital dollars and O&M dollars. We're finding productivity savings and efficiency savings across the board. It's been very exciting to us, and it's just the beginning. It's really just the beginning of our journey.
No, it is incredibly exciting. And I imagine that it's no small feat, especially, getting started back when you did, kind of preemptively from some of, how the market has been moving. I know there has been an increase in investments over the last decade in digitized services or asset management and tracking and power generation and all of that stuff. But to be on the cusp of it constantly means that there's a lot of dancing that I'm sure that you have to do with partners such as Jan as well as your team. So
Absolutely,
yeah.
absolutely. And the trend now of a lot of the early models are very, I call them physics based
Mhm.
techniques in creating the applications that we're using now with the advent of artificial intelligence and machine learning, that family of application and approaches in massaging all this data that we're streaming. It's really been fascinating on what can be done and how can we develop our workers into true digital workers, having the intelligence pushed all the way at the edge with our frontline people and first line supervisors in managing our assets on a day-to-day basis and having the intelligence right at their fingertips.
Yeah, and what's interesting as well, Gil, is if you think about it, the physical network, the physical grid is changing drastically with renewables, with distributed resources, with renewable gas and hydrogen coming into the system as well over time. So there's a lot of change in the physical network already. Then there's this whole layer that Gil, has spent a lot of time on with NYPA is the digital layer on top of that, which is a whole new world for utilities and their customers, and as well as partnering. And then I think the third layer, where utilities always played a big role, and Gil knows that in terms of the social role, but that whole social role is becoming so much more important because the role of energy goes so much further than in the past. Energy will become really, really important as we change the way we live in cities, the way we transport our goods, the way we produce our goods. So energy will play a much more fundamental role in the economy of the future, and concepts like circular economy. And with that social role that utilities always had is changing as well drastically. So I mean, it's exciting on one hand. It's also challenging for utility CEOs like Gil to keep up with all the changes in each of these layers, and that's the, I think, expanded role and responsibility for utilities.
No, I mean, I don't think that that could have been better said, because that is a lot to juggle. I mean, you can't just, really kind of drill down into, what you're providing, but you really do have to open up your team, re-engage partners, work with vendors differently, and then have a true holistic understanding of how all of these pieces come into place. And having a background in the Internet of Things, like looking at that ecosystem develop over time across markets and industries, like being in IT alone and being in OT alone, or being in the physical side, you really have to be able to straddle each of these business lines to have real success overall, and to really serve your customers the way that they need to. And it's only going to become even more entangled as we move forward. And so I'm really excited to get into some of this a little bit further with you guys. And speaking of, the role of energy connectors kind of moving beyond the utility space into economic development realms and some other things, what role does transportation play in this now that utilities are moving into these energy connector roles moving forward? Jan, you want to kind of kick us off with that one? Oh.
Yeah, sure. So transportation is going to be really important, and Gil will talk about what they're doing in New York. But if you think about it, 30% of emission comes from transportation, more or less across the world, and transportation will become an integrated part of the energy system. So that's one of those new areas that, in the past it was not part of the energy system, and will become part of the energy system. If you look at the US, for example, if we would have a 20% penetration of personal electric vehicles, this is only personal electric vehicles, cars that you and I drive, there would be over 300 of gigawatts of total capacity available behind the meter. Now, I'm not saying that 300 gigawatts is available all the time, because obviously when you're driving, you can't connect to the network and it's not available to you. But being able to monetize that 300 gigawatts of capacity, use it for load control, use it for peak periods, use it for power quality, for backup, right? We're going to talk about resiliency here in a little bit as well, but using it for backup storage. I remember a picture from Texas where literally someone with an F-150 was providing power to the house through a cable. Well, if you have your car in the garage and it's connected already through your charger, then you could actually fall back on that car in case the power goes out during a storm or whatsoever. So I think, again, the utilities play that connecting role where all those electric vehicles need to integrate into the grid. If you talk about fleets, school buses, or larger truck fleets and things like that, you can only imagine what the art of the possible is there. School buses are available after 4 or 4:30, perfect timing for peak demand optimization, and you can really use it as a demand response resource there as well. Really cool to see that FERC came out with 2222, where really energy providers can aggregate distributed energy resources at the wholesale level. I think it was a big step forward. But still, you need to manage it at the distribution level, then at the transmission level, and even back into the generation level. And that's where, again, the energy connector role is absolutely key to unlock all that value.
Yeah, and Jan mentioned it, it's about 30-40% of greenhouse gas emissions on average, right? And so we cannot meet our climate change goals without addressing transportation. And so there's just no choice but to address transportation. And the grid is so important, as Jan described. We need to reimagine and modernize the grid to be able to serve electric vehicles and for electric vehicles to be able to serve the grid. And that's a completely new way of how the grid is going to work. We need to make sure that disadvantaged communities are not shut out from this transformation and transition that we're doing. We need to make sure that it's resilient and reliable. We just saw what happened in Texas a few weeks ago. If all of our cars are electric and something like that happens, right? How are we going to cope? So there needs to be a complete reimagination of the grid. At NYPA, we are building the fast charging network across our highway. So we're going to be building 800 fast chargers at 200 sites. So that in New York, if you're driving around our state along our highways, you don't have to worry about where to get your next charge. And we're trying to really make it simple for New Yorkers to buy electric vehicles. Now, it's not really where we want to be permanently. I think we are serving a purpose of priming the pump and catalyzing the market so that the private sector will come in and install fast chargers, even in more workplaces, at homes, in housing complexes, etc., to really enable a ubiquitous EV ecosystem in our state.
Yeah.
And Joyce, it's really exciting. I'm not sure if you saw, but in the last couple of weeks, there have been multiple announcements about what Gil described, these corridors. And they're building a corridor for the state of New York, right? North-south, I'm sure, and east-west, Gil, I imagine. And you see several announcements that came out as well. I know in Texas that there's been discussions for a long time about a corridor between the cities there. There's a Midwest alliance now between utilities to talk about the corridor there. So I think it's really, really important that utilities like NYPA has take a lead role. Again, these charging stations and the infrastructure that goes with it, as well as the electrons that are available at certain times and need to be made available at other times, the utilities play a very important role in managing that.
No, most definitely. I do think that's incredibly exciting, and I agree with both of you. In order to, if we're kind of waiting for the industry to find the market opportunity, that's really the right time for private companies to come in and to establish these things. We might be waiting a bit longer because, as we know, things kind of take a little bit longer to mature than what we'd like. So the local and regional utilities who have the ability to take the lead and establish that initial baseline, that what you're talking about, especially along really high traffic corridors that are just exploding in growth. I mean, that's the other thing too, is that's you're not just connecting two isolated hubs, like you really are having to build amidst really dynamic population growth and investment into some of those corridors as well from other perspectives. So it's a really foundational piece that's coming together. And it is incredibly exciting. Jan,
yeah, the utilities have a seat at the table. They're not the food being served.
Right. Exactly. So can you guys kind of speak a little bit more fully on these shifting customer expectations, right? So if utilities are entering the transportation space by really establishing this EV infrastructure as well as some of these other pieces, how are utilities really managing these changing customer expectations during digitalization and other innovation projects? Jan, do you want to, or Gil? No, you.
No, Gil, go first.
Yeah. It's important for utilities to place the customer at the center of this transformation, right? Sometimes we get enamored with our assets and with our power plants and our toys, right? When in fact, we really need to be intimate and listen with an experiment with our customers. There's going to be this iterative process between utilities and its customers. So in our case, we're also digitizing that customer experience, because nowadays, we saw it during this pandemic. I don't know, we ordered our food, we ordered everything, from whatever we needed to buy, we did it either through Amazon or some other service. Our food shopping, our prepared food, almost everything was done digitally. And I think even in our sector, that's going to happen. The customer interaction and customer experience, a lot of it will be digital, but it has to be as simple as the systems and the software that we're using in our day-to-day lives. It can't be the normal utility clunky software that we normally produce, right? So that's a completely different area also. We need to learn from the consumer business. We need to learn from B2B business where they really have that nailed down, how to do that properly, how to make sure that you have delighted customers, that you have informed customers, especially for a public good that's necessary for the day-to-day living of our customers and the economy at large. You know, where I think it's safe to say that where most of our energy systems will be electrified, and so electricity is going to be like the oxygen of the economy, and without it, the economy is not going to function. So that realizing that and dealing with our customers more intimately is going to be crucial.
Thank you. Jan, how do you feel about this?
Well, I think Gil is absolutely right. The customer centricity is key, and you need technology and digital solutions for that. Why is that? Because customers have individual needs. So in the past, utilities spoke about customer segmentation, and I'm sure many utilities are still doing that. But in the future, every single customer will be different and will be treated differently by the utility. And only through digital solutions and technology you can actually make that work. Some customers care about cost more so than about reliability. I happen to live in Miami. Reliability for me is very important during storm, for example. So maybe I'm willing to pay a little bit more for higher reliability. Other customers really want convenience. They just want to put the thermostat on a certain level, and they want the utility to manage it for them. So again, the demands will be very specific, and that's why technology is so important, including machine learning and AI, as Gil mentioned. The other thing, and I think NYPA is absolutely having the right discussions at the strategic level. The other thing is, I think utilities or energy connectors will actually get more involved in the business of their clients' business. And what I mean by that is many of their clients, large commercial, industrial, cities, municipalities, but also more residential, really want to help with climate and want to decarbonize their footprint. And I see utilities really becoming trusted advisors to go on a decarbonization journey with their customers, providing solutions that help their customers decarbonize their business, whether it's the logistics business, whether it's warehouses, whether it's production processes, heavy production processes, which are really hard to decarbonize. But the utility will need to understand more of the core process of their clients, well beyond providing electricity or gas for that matter.
Yeah, that's important. It's probably what makes NYPA a little bit unique. We made it a key strategic initiative that we are going to help our customers decarbonize their operations. So it's not just what we sell to them. It's not, we're not only decarbonizing the electricity that we sell to them. We want to partner with them, actually side by side, look at their entire operations and be that partner to help them decarbonize across the board in their operations so that they can meet our very aggressive goals in our state for climate change. So that is a little bit of a unique twist. We're a lot deeper in partnering with our customers.
Yeah, I mean, so the the complexity that you guys are dealing with is only increasing, right? You're talking about lots of different layers and nuance, and the customization, right? So if you really are going to be leveraging these digital tools and services and new technologies and improved infrastructure across the board, to provide that kind of curated, customized, tailored relationships and advisement to your customers and your communities. That can pose some really interesting challenges. Do you guys want to speak a little bit about, some of the roadblocks or some of the stumbling blocks that kind of come up as a result of approaching these things?
Well, let me start. The one of the issues right now is that all of us are coming out of this recession, coming out of this pandemic, and our customers, like all of us, we have different priorities just to kind of get things back in order. So that can be a challenge, right, in working with them, but it can also be an opportunity. At NYPA, we're actually using our projects, whether it's energy efficiency or electric vehicle, building transmission. We're building 3 major transmission lines in New York now, in upstate New York. The last big transmission lines built in upstate New York was in 1978, also done by NYPA. So we're building 3, right? So we're leveraging our capabilities and our projects to help stimulate the economy, to help create jobs. Energy efficiency is one of the biggest sources of jobs in the clean energy space, more than solar, more than wind. And so we are doubling down on energy efficiency because we know that that's going to help a lot of the contractors, a lot of the equipment manufacturers, et cetera, in that space, and provides a lot of job and good stimulus to restart our economy.
Thank you. Jan, from a higher, like, global perspective, or, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think we're seeing more and more aggressive goals and targets around decarbonization. NYPA is in a little bit of a unique situation because they can do so much within the covenant that they have, which is really exciting, and that's why Gil and his team can really lead in many of these areas. But in a lot of other states and countries, policy is way ahead of regulation. So regulation is trying to catch up and put the regulation time in place to allow utilities to engage differently with their clients, allow utilities to make investments that are not the traditional, asset-based investments, and so on and so forth. So I think there's a challenge around regulatory models and regulation. EEI came out with a white paper on that in the last couple of weeks. David O'Brien on our team actually helped with that. A really good read about new regulatory models and how important different rate structures are as well to support all the things that we've been talking about. So I think that is one of the challenges. Solutions exist. Policies are getting more aggressive, and the targets are becoming stronger. So now it's really about getting the regulation right, and allow utilities to really implement things within a new regulatory context. That's going to be one of the biggest challenges as part of the transformation.
Excellent. And I mean, it makes sense, right? They kind of all go hand in hand. And so it's sort of a little bit of a chicken and egg scenario on who's going to get there first, or how do you best set up in order for the other to kind of come through finally. But it seems like there's some fantastic examples on what you're working on at NYPA, as well as some other really cool international projects as well that we can kind of use as a great sort of benchmark as we move forward in this. Before we get a little bit further, I just want to remind everybody tuning in, thank you again for joining us as we talk about energy equity and the role of energy connectors. But I'd love it if you guys have any questions or comments to please drop them below. We're going to make sure that we get those answered to you before we finish up here in just a bit. So this is something that always gets talked about, no matter what kind of technology projects you're working on, and considering how diversified your projects have to be as we're building this new era of innovation in energy and utilities. What is the role of security right now? I know there was a recent snafu where there was a security issue with a water utility plant. How do you guys feel that utilities should approach security in this new era?
Now, it has to be built in right from the beginning of everything that we're doing and every step of the way. It can't be something that we think about afterwards when we implement projects, when we launch our initiatives. You know, with digitization, the, by definition, the threat surface is a lot bigger. There are a lot more doors that bad actors can get in. So, you know, we need, this is a risk management issue. And so we need to think about architecture. We need across the board in everything that we're doing, we need to think about data governance across the board in every project, initiatives that we're doing. We need to think about our approach to application development in everything that we're doing. And cybersecurity and physical security must be part of every step of what we're doing. Now, when it comes to cyber, it really requires a collective defense and collective response. So the industry, and we are working as a sector, the electric sector through the Electricity Subsector Coordinating Council. We are also working with other sectors like the financial sector, the telecom sector, in terms of sharing information and doing this principle of collective defense and collective response. We're partnering with our federal government, Department of Homeland Security, Department of Energy, the FBI, et cetera, because that partnership is going to be very, very critical in providing the appropriate defense. And as you know, with the solar winds, the water company in Florida that you had mentioned, it's not easy. But I think that I'm very encouraged that the industry is coming together. The relationship between the federal government and industry is robust. And I think our sector is actually one of the sectors that's really ahead in this space.
Yeah, which is incredibly critical, right? For a variety of reasons. Jan, do you have anything to add to the security conversation?
No, as you can hear, Gil is very knowledgeable in this space, and extremely passionate. The only other angle that we'll see more and more is think from a risk perspective, and Gil's absolutely right. Don't look at the individual event, but look at the broader risk and bake it into everything you do. Is long-term climate risk, because that's the other thing that will come in place. So there will just be another dimension to all the risk complexity that already exists. And thinking about long-term climate risk, 15, 20, 25 years from now, what will happen with rising sea levels? What will happen with more hurricanes, storms, earthquakes? Where do you get your equipment from, and does it come from areas that are under threat? So that's just another dimension. But if you have the framework set up, then you can add just to it. So that's my only comment.
Yeah, Jan, if I could just amplify what Jan said, supply chain is a big issue and being dealt with right now by the industry, the original equipment manufacturers, our national labs, the federal government. We're all working to figure out how do we secure the supply chain. Jan is absolutely correct. In light of what happened in Texas and in California this past summer during the heat wave, the security of the grid is so critical. But really, we need to do our maintenance upgrades, our capital upgrades, not based on the weather of today.
Right.
It has to be based on the weather of the future. Because a lot of what we do in the utility space are capital intensive and long-lived type of projects. At NYPA, we're actually embarking on that study now. We're working with Argonne National Lab and the other national labs, Electric Power Research Institute, Columbia University, and NOAA, to figure out, okay, what are the potential weather scenarios in New York 10, 20, 30, 40 years from today? Okay, with that, given that, how should we rethink the design basis in our planning, design, engineering, operations, and maintenance, right? Do we put more, elevate a substation? Do we put a protective wall? Do we use different insulators, etc.? So we're thinking about all of that and rethinking about everything that we're doing today, not based on today's weather, but based on the weather of the future.
I mean, and we thought that meteorologists had it rough. I imagine that projecting things out, not just a week, but 10 to 20 years, really requires a lot of collaboration and a lot of really intense modeling and just vision on really kind of how best to approach some things. Because I think even if we could wave a magic wand and have it all set up, that life would still throw us a bunch of curveballs and surprises in the mix of this. So kind of moving a little beyond the security conversation, but to kind of talk about those new models and that new perspectives that we're talking about over the next 10, 20, 30 years, how is economic engagement and development going to be like a critical part of not just the COVID-19 recovery, but, there's a lot of infrastructure innovations and things that need to change across the board here in the US as well as in other countries. Can we speak a little bit more about how those energy connectors can stimulate local and regional economic development and expand those projects?
Gil, you want to go first or you want me to go first?
Yeah, why don't you go first, Jan, and then I'll supplement.
Sure. So, yeah, we're not talking about 20, 30 years anymore, Joyce. Those days are over, by the way. We're talking about 5, 10 years or even this year or next year, right? When it comes down to what's energy's role in driving economic development. And Gil will talk about New York, which is really interesting, but I will talk about Europe. In November, December, in Europe, they approved a 1.8 trillion euro stimulus package, Build Back Better. And that was all based around creating jobs, stimulating economic growth, reducing unemployment, and using it to build, again, infrastructure of the future, the energy system of the future, which is more resilient, which is cleaner, which is greener, et cetera, et cetera. And it's just really exciting to see that the US is having similar discussions, and some states are further ahead than others. But there's a lot of opportunity. The Green Recovery Plan will create 2.3 million jobs, not in 20 years, but by 2023, which is in 2 years from now. 2.3 million jobs in 2 years, over 600,000 in Germany, over 400,000 in Spain. And then, at the macro level, the IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, has estimated that renewable energy could employ more than 40 million people by 2050. And that the total energy sector employment could reach 100 million by 2050, which is basically doubling what it employs today. So, Gil mentioned that energy is becoming more important as an industry for our broader economy. And there are real opportunities out there to double the amount of people that are working in the energy industry, even with oil and gas becoming more and more of a declining resource. So it's extremely exciting, and I know New York is working hard on this as well.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, so in New York, it's very intentional that we are going to be using infrastructure projects, especially those that are ready to get started or restarted, as a stimulus in restarting our economy here in New York. I just saw in my my news alerts that the Biden administration may be coming out with a $3 trillion infrastructure / climate package. So that's exciting. But I want to focus on a couple of things. Jan mentioned one. We have people who work in the oil and gas industry and coal industry. We need to figure out how to help them transition. We just can't forget about them. Oh, we got to phase out fossil fuels and coal, and not think about helping them transition into having good jobs in the clean energy sector. That's number one. Number two, the concept of climate justice. You know, if you look just here in New York, the zip codes where you have the highest asthma rates, the highest heat indices, and the highest infection of COVID, they are in zip codes of low to middle income communities of color. Those are just facts. And we need to, when we start investing in energy and climate related infrastructure, we need to target investments in those areas that have been disproportionately impacted. In New York, there is a goal of all of our, up to 40% of all of our investment in this space will be targeted to those communities. And so when we evaluate our projects, that's what we're thinking about. At NYPA, part of our diversity, equity, and inclusion program, we are committing to spending $500 million over the next 5 years in clean energy solutions in those communities, disadvantaged communities, to start addressing the issue of climate justice.
And we see more of those, Joyce. We did a project in Denver, e-mobility project for disadvantaged communities with ride sharing and really sharing infrastructure so it becomes affordable for the people there and it helps them as well as with the pollution. In Massachusetts, a big renewal of the energy efficiency program, overhaul of the energy efficiency programs in Massachusetts, also focused on underserved communities. And on top of that, using minority-owned businesses to actually implement some of those programs. So the whole climate with equality and helping underserved communities. We're seeing a lot of these projects and programs, and it's really exciting to see.
Jan, at NYPA, we're doubling our what's called MWBE, Minority Women Business Enterprise spend by 2x, 2 times over the next 5 years. So in addition to spending $500 million in customer energy solution projects in disadvantaged communities, we're doubling our MWBE spend. And we're investing a lot in K-12 STEM programs, right, all the way to internships and co-op programs, not only at NYPA, but with the contractors and consultants and partners of NYPA. So I'm going to be hitting up Jan and say, hey, you know, we're training all these smart K-12 kids. Can you please give them opportunities for internship at Guidehouse? So expect that to happen. So that is something that we believe in, not just at NYPA, but here in New York. But I think it's important. It's important that we address communities that have been historically been disadvantaged and are suffering from the impacts of climate change.
No, thank you guys so much for that. And that actually rolled into one of the questions I had already stacked up, talking about, you know, the discrepancies and the gaps that are kind of there, as well as kind of touching on one of the audience questions, which was, you know, how are you guys working with, you know, how can you expand the EV access to lower income customers? And I feel like, you know, we kind of all wrap that up. One of the exciting things that I've seen, you know, I have a background in startups as well, you know, in Texas, and the investment perspectives have kind of shifted a bit. And so they're really looking at tapping into those minority and women-owned businesses and startup companies and innovators, civic innovation programs that are combining community initiatives through STEM, as well as partnering with utilities and other municipal partner organizations to really have that holistic, intelligent community perspective. And I think what you're working on in New York, and Jan, how you and Guidehouse kind of allow your partner utilities and just help us kind of put thought leadership around building those relationships is really exciting. We did have a customer question come in. So this is, what is the expected speed of transition to customer engagement? So in the past, most customers were only interested in having simple and reliable electricity services. And this is still mainly the case, but when is it expected to have a majority of customers engaged in the optimization and sustainability of system operations through digitization and electrification?
Yeah, I get this question all the time when I, when I present to, board of directors or executive teams. There's a famous saying of Bill Gates, which goes something like, we always overestimate the change that will occur in the next 2 years and underestimate the change that will occur in the next 10 years. And I think that is really true. No, we're not talking about 20 or 30 years anymore. We believe that within 10 to 12 years, every utility has gone through that transition, completed that transition with their customers, 10 to 12 years. So keep that in mind. That's the horizon that we're talking about, which is a way shorter horizon than utilities typically think about, right? Big investments are 20, 30, 40, 50, years. So 10 to 12 years, we think that most of this transformation, including how utilities engage with a customer, has taken place. But in order to get there, you have to build some of the foundation in the next 5 years. You have to build a foundation, as NYPA is doing, in terms of being able to help your clients with buildings and energy efficiency and decarbonizing your buildings, with EV charging infrastructure that Gil mentioned as well. So a lot of the fundamentals will be built in the next 5 years. But I think the complete transition, I think we're talking about 10 to 12 years, and it's a wrap. All utilities will have changed at that time, will be much more of connectors and orchestrators, and have a completely different new models with their clients. Now, will there be utilities that move faster? Absolutely. But 10 to 12 years for all of the utilities globally, that's what we are thinking.
Man, that is some really exciting stuff, That's just
maybe even faster, and as Jan said, in some cases.
Right.
I see the driver as our young people. Our young people are demanding different things from us. They're going to be looking at land use and zoning and more bicycles, more scooters. They just think differently, and they are fast in adopting digital technology. To them, it's second nature, right? I have a 15-year-old daughter, and she doesn't read any instruction when we open any kind of digital device that we buy, and they just use it right away. And it's so, Jan and I were used to like opening the instruction manual and follow, step by step, right? On step one, we do this, step two. That the next generation is not like that, and I have a feeling that, and they care about the environment, they care about climate, they care about social justice, and I just think that they are going to be the primary drivers and will force us to move faster.
No, I mean, if you're paying attention to anything that's going on TikTok, definitely the Gen Zers are calling us all out for a variety of things, including mom jeans, which apparently are back in style. So got it on that trend. We had another question come in for Gil, which was, what does the NYPA stakeholder process look like to develop the MWBE spending plan?
Well, we created that plan as one of the foundational pillars of our strategic plan. So we did our strategic plan all of last year and submitted it to our board of trustees for approval in December. So we make, we have had a very robust MWBE plan, and we're basically supercharging it as part of us, one of the foundational pillars. We have 5 foundational pillars of our strategic plan. And so now what we really want to do are twofold. One is double the spend, as I've said. And number 2, we want to expand the pool and the capacity of MWBE firms that can work with us. So we have MWBE firms right now. We want to help them expand their capacity so that we can give them more work. That's number 1. Number 2, we want to cast a wider net and help other companies to be able to be qualified to do work with us and work with our partners like Guidehouse and others, right? Because they share our values in terms of MWBE. And so it's not only for NYPA, but also to expand opportunities for MWBE for our vendors, contractors, strategic partners like Guidehouse, and also our customers. We have a lot of big corporations, industrial manufacturing customers across New York, and we also want them to access the MWBE firms that we're working with.
Yeah, and so those big ambitious goals of NYPA, they flow through into, you know, the partner ecosystem. So that means that we are using more, you know, minority and women-owned businesses as well in our projects. You know, the example of Massachusetts that I mentioned in New York, we work with several as well. So it's really cool to see how it all flows down into the supply chain. That's how we make big ambitious goals happen, which is really exciting.
No, it absolutely is. And it's really encouraging to see, you know, that there's more conversations and more channels, and doubling down, I think, is something that you mentioned, Gil, and definitely Jan. So we have just a few minutes left, but we would be really remiss if we didn't talk about renewables. You know, Jan, what's really exciting you right now in the renewable space, you know, from a big industry perspective?
Yeah, I think renewables will continue to grow, and we need more renewables. But I will throw out two things. One is offshore wind, and Gil is very passionate about this as well. I'm from the Netherlands. We're building over 200 gigawatts of offshore wind in the North Sea, which is a little sea there between, you know, the UK and the Netherlands and Belgium. So we need to ramp it up in terms of offshore wind, and the Northeast is a perfect area for that. And then we cannot, a lot of that electricity will bring on board through transmission, but we can't bring everything onshore through transmission. So hydrogen production, green hydrogen production, we take offshore wind, we produce hydrogen at sea, and we put it into pipelines that will fuel heavy transportation. It will help decarbonize heavy industries. And ultimately, it could actually be used for heating in houses over time as well. Europe is taking the lead there. Really, really exciting stuff. This is hydrogen produced from clean, renewable energy. So it is clean, not hydrogen as we produced it in the past, which is, you know, gray and blue hydrogen. But this is clean, green hydrogen that we will need in our system, specifically in areas like, you know, New York or the Netherlands, for that matter, where we can't, you know, get through cold winter weeks without a renewable fuel. So that's one, and then the other one is not renewables, although it's a renewable solution, is fleet conversion. We spoke about electrification of transportation. When you can convert your fleet to electric, and it's going to cost you less per mile driven, and it's better for the environment, and it's a great experience for your chauffeurs, that's when things will happen. And we're going to see a lot of fleets being converted over the next 5 years. Really excited about that as well.
No, that's super cool. And Texas might have to be added to those crazy winters and the need for green hydrogen. Gil, would you talk about NYPA and what you guys are doing?
Yeah, as Jan said, let me pick up from the last thing he said. Transportation, public transportation. You know, if you want to address low to middle income, disadvantaged communities, you got to address public transportation. So we are building the charging infrastructure for transit authorities of our largest cities here in New York. So New York City, the MTA, we call it Metropolitan Transportation Authority, and similar organizations in large cities such as Yonkers, Albany, Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo. We're working to build their electric charging infrastructure. Now, shifting to your original question in terms of renewables, you know, solar and wind, I think, will continue to grow, both large scale, utility scale, and distributed solar, large scale wind, land-based and offshore. In New York, we have a target of 9 gigawatts by 2035, and we already had a couple of RFPs issued by our sister authority, NYSERDA, New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. I'm seeing a lot of growth recently, really, in solar. NYPA, we're doing a lot of community solar, where we're using public buildings and public properties, land properties, underused land, for community solar. So we're placing solar panels on roofs and on land, underused land, not just for the not just to provide electricity to the host site, but we're oversizing it so that the extra output, extra electricity we produce, we make that available to disadvantaged communities near those facilities. So I see a lot of growth in that. Energy storage is going to play a big role in helping to balance the grid, especially with a lot more intermittent renewables. And one last renewable I want to mention is hydro. You know, as you know, 80% of our generation is hydro. We must preserve our hydro assets. We can't be building wind and solar to then displace hydro, right? Hydro needs to be preserved. So we need to put the right market rules, the right regulatory construct to make sure that we're preserving the value of hydro. Hydro is not only important from a renewable perspective, it is also like a shock absorber of the system. It's great for balancing. It's great for reliability and resiliency of the power system.
Amazing. Thank you. Well, we are just a couple minutes over, but I want to have a little bit of room for you guys to have any sort of final closing thoughts, maybe something that we didn't get to talk about that you want to get in before we shut it down for the day. Jan?
Oh boy, this was not one of your questions. No, it's always great to be with Gil, because they have such a strong vision, and it ties to the state goals and also, you know, the US goals and the global goals. We can't forget that we're still behind the 8 ball as it pertains to climate. You see the events, and 2020 was a record year in terms of storms and wildfires and hurricanes and earthquakes. It will become more intense every year. And as an industry, and with leaders like Gil, we have to lead by example. We need to create the energy system of the future, which will provide a lot more options and choices and functionalities to our customers. And at the same time, it's greener. We believe it can be done. We believe it can be done on short term, and it will not cost us more money in the long run. So, you know, Joyce, I'm very passionate about climate change, and our team is very passionate about climate change. We have 800 people working on this every day, but we have work to be done. But it's great to be with leaders like Gil, because that really helps us move forward.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And Gil, final word.
Well, thank you to you, Joyce, Zpryme, for this opportunity. Always awesome to be with our partner, Guidehouse, and especially my good friend, Jan. I just want to repeat what I said before, that we need to put our customers at the center of this transformation. It has to start with the customer. That's number one. Number two, we cannot forget the disadvantaged communities. We cannot forget addressing climate justice and a just transition as we go forward in this exciting, really, really exciting transformation that's happening in our industry. Thank you again, Joyce, and back to you.
Awesome. Well, I mean, I'm blown away by this conversation. I think this was a fantastic way to kick off the week, and has definitely got my mind going on a variety of different topics that are incredibly relevant and mission critical to all of us in our homes as well as in our communities. For those of you that tuned in, thank you so much. Please be sure to follow Guidehouse and NYPA for more information on just what they're working on, the use cases that Jan's got going on, and all the projects, as well as what Gil has. We'd be happy to continue to facilitate other conversations around this, so stay tuned. And with that, thank you, everybody. Have a great week.
Thank you.
Thank you. Be well and be safe.
Thank
Be
you.
safe.